So we are at time. I'm going to give it another minute or two just because after lunch everybody trails in and we have plenty of time today, so I'm not too worried about the time. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. This is the Secure Asset Transfer Protocol BOF. My name is Wes Hardiker, and there's a mailing list. It's actually SAT, not SATP, just in case anybody wants to try and join it. This is the introduction. We're going to go through a few things first, of course. Thank you to Dennis, who agreed to take notes. I would love it if somebody else would help him out, because it's always a hard job. The note-taking link inside the agenda makes it very, very easy to take notes. So please help him out if you're able. We'll have four sort of major sections for the information presentation for today. There will be one just about the problem space and goals by Thomas. Venkat's going to describe the use case with supply chain trade, and then there'll be another use case with regulated finance sort of transactions that the proponents believe this was a good use case for. And then we'll have a status report on sort of what's happening. We had a BOF at IETF114, and the proponents took a lot of the advice that came from the room, found it very helpful. They've been meeting frequently, talking frequently, and I've talked to them as well some. So we'll get some updates on what has been done since 114. And then finally, there's a lot of time for open discussion. For the problem space and proposed starting solutions, I do want to hold the questions to sort of clarifying questions first. And then we'll actually have the open discussion about the typical questions of is this what's the right outcome for this BOF? But so for the middle part, just please ask clarifying questions, which I'll reiterate as time goes on. I'm sure most of you are well familiar with the note since this is now midday Thursday and we're not too far from the end of the conference. If you don't know it, anything you contribute will be used and recorded, and it's part of the record. So there's a list of BCPs that will help you understand things that include IPs and working group processes and copyrights and all of that type of stuff. Please be aware of it. Remember that we do have a code of conduct guidelines that includes wearing a mask. We'll see what happens at the end of this meeting, but during this meeting, we have all agreed by consensus to wear masks. So please, everybody do wear a mask the entire time. You can see that I'm speaking even with it. You can probably hear me pretty well. So you can actually use one at a microphone, but you're allowed to take it off at a microphone if you need be, if you're up front. Reminder, the session is being recorded, so both in-person and remote participants will be recorded. The BOF will be posted on YouTube like the last one was, so make sure that you are aware of that. The important takeaways for this BOF are, is this a problem that needs to be solving? Is the IETF the right place for it? Are there enough participants that are willing and able to help in terms of both reviewing and editing and all that type of stuff? Is the scope well defined? Are the deliverables and the outputs expected to be correct? And is the working group likely to succeed? We'll come back to those questions. So we're going to start now with the problem and proposed starting solutions section, which will start with Thomas and the SATP problem space and goals.
Can people hear me okay? Okay.
Get a little closer.
A little closer, okay. Okay, and Wes is gonna, run the slides. Thank you, Wes.
So
sorry. Yeah, so some of you who attended the Philly IETF might recognize a couple of these slides. I'm just going to go through and recap some of the presentations and the inputs, the good inputs we received in Philadelphia. And we've incorporated those inputs, pretty much every one of them, and made us rewrite some of the slides, because I think some of the words were not conveying what we meant to say. Next slide, please, Wes. So this is probably, I put this in just to clarify that we have a growing number of digital asset networks. They all run on the internet. Many of the next generation of developers may not even realize that many of the features and protocols actually run over IETF RFCs, right? IETF standards. So this fact that there's just a large growth and there's a lot of proprietary stuff out there introduces a number of interesting security challenges and, of course, data privacy challenges. And my solution to this is, well, go back to the IETF and do what the IETF is best doing, namely producing written technical standards. And the goal is for interoperability of these networks. Next slide. Am I speaking loud enough for people online? Yeah. So when we say network interoperability, the goal really is to move across a digital asset, and there's a definition of what digital asset is, across from one network to another, satisfying certain conditions such as atomicity, consistency, and so on. Today, what we're seeing in the industry is that people are doing just bilateral agreements, and to me, this is like the mid-90s when we have multiple ISPs, and ISPs used to do bilateral peering agreements. It's almost like that today. And there are a number of other proprietary transfer protocols that they're being used, but again, it's only for bilateral connections. So really, this is kind of a lack of written standards that financial institutions and other organizations can point to and mandate compliance of implementations. The lack of those standards are inhibiting the industry. It's like, well, we don't want to enter because if something goes wrong, we lose money, we lose assets, let's just wait. And I think this is a great opportunity for the IETF as a community to actually contribute, to the world, particularly in the context of interop. Next slide, thanks. So this is from Philadelphia. So there's so many types and kinds of digital assets. So we're using the term value-bearing data object. So you have a value-bearing data object in one network and you're trying to move it across to another network. So that entails recreating exact copy on another network and deleting or invalidating the original copy. And so you need this condition that there can only be one at any one time, and it needs to satisfy the ACID property: atomicity, consistency, isolation, durability. This is your database textbook, and freshman or junior textbook. And the transfer must be verifiable by an authorized third party, because there's going to be disputes, and you need to be able to bring in an auditor or somebody like that that can replay and look at the traces of the transfer and say, yes, did not happen, or a fault happened, or a bug happened, or somebody was dishonest, right? So that's a key requirement. Next one. And so this is the proposed scope is the yellow area in the middle. So people ask me all the time, well, what about the networks? Well, there's just too many types of networks, and new ones are coming up all the time. And to me, this is, if you're old enough, this is the LAN problem. If you guys remember IBM SNA networks and DECnet and Ethernet, you know who won that battle, Ethernet. But this is also exactly like intra-domain and intra-domain routing, right? So what we're saying in our language, the yellow bit is the BGP protocol, right? So are we going to define what a router is? The gateways? No, we're not going to build gateways. We don't know how to build gateways. That's implementer's problem. What we're going to do is define the interaction between the gateways, and that's the yellow bit. And I think this is the best thing for the industry as a whole, because the industry itself is still emerging and evolving, and new types of networks are being created, right? So we don't want to touch that. Let the market decide which type of network wins the day. That's fine. That's fine with me. But we want to ensure interoperability across these types of networks. Next slide, thank you. So this is, just some basic, assumptions for this, the yellow bit to run, which is both networks need to share some common understanding semantics of the data objects and validity. What does valid mean? All right, so that's, we assume this exists because we can't impose this on the networks. For our own design principles, we assume the networks are opaque. So you might hear the word permissioned, access controlled, private. Those are the terms that sometimes they use. I like to use the word opaque because it refers to the data objects inside those networks. We're designing for the worst case scenario when both sides are opaque. It's nice if both sides are open and so on. But when I explain this to people, I sometimes point to just my own ISP, cable last mile provider in Boston. I can't see into my ISP routing table, right? Unless they give me authorization. So and I have to explain to the undergrads, the internet is not one long contiguous public network. The internet is a sequence of private ISPs, and there's backbone fiber everywhere, right? So you guys know, I don't have to tell you guys this, but we're trying to use the same design principles that got us the internet and the scalable internet for SATP. The third one is gateways are assumed to be trusted. We have to assume that they're trusted to even begin this protocol. In reality, what's going to happen is gateway operators need to take on liability. If they screw up, the thing crashes. If they lose an asset, they have to sign on. This is, to me, this is exactly like a PKI CA issuing certs, right? If they screw up, if people here from VeriSign, if you screw up, you lose somebody's public key, there's a big contract there that says you're liable to $1 million, $10 million, right? All that stuff. Yes, I was co-author of the VeriSign 100-page certificate practices statement. It's now down to, since Symantec bought it, it's like 80 pages. And there's warranties, there's lines there. And in fact, those...
So let's not devolve into one rat hole here, okay?
That's not distract. So the other thing that's needed is that there are cases where you don't want to move an asset, you just want to extract information out. So we've been using the term views. So somebody from outside might say, hey, it could be an auditor, it could be the government, say, we want to see this particular transaction on this date, on this particular record. Can you extract it out? That's also the function of a gate. So it's not moving value, it's just extracting information out. We call it data sharing or view sharing. It's kind of the same thing. Next one. So this is motherhood apple pie. So we're just copying the architecture of basically intra-domain and inter-domain. And the last bullet is the important thing, that for scalability reasons, the gateway needs to hide whatever's behind it, just like a BGP router hides the fact that a domain might be running OSPF, RIP1, RIP2. We don't see it from the outside. And in fact, the outside doesn't really care. Next slide. So this is the set of documents that we propose as the starting point. A lot of them are version 0. A lot of them have holes. I like the SAT core has like blank sections with the word TBD in it, which is fine. We're sort of taking our time there. And I encourage you to read the architecture document because it explains some of the design principles that we're stealing from the design of the internet architecture. I think this is the last slide. Okay. Any clarifying questions?
Alyssa?
Yeah, thanks. Can you just talk a little bit more about when you say the gateways need to be trusted, like trusted by whom? What's the trust model?
Right. So it needs to be trusted to function as a implementer of the SATP protocol, right? So it needs to have keys. It's going to be signing stuff, right? So we have it's not in our power to say to an implementer, this is how you're going to manage your private keys. You're going to use a TPM chip or you're going to use whatever, an SGX capable hardware. But we have to assume that both sides, gateway G1 and G2, have done enough exchange of information before the flow occurs. That both sides are understanding that, so make it even simpler, gateways have, say, certificates, X509 certs, they exchange certs, they understand the certs belong to legal organizations, financial institutions, branded financial institutions, and they agree to proceed. Now, so when we say trust to be running the protocol correctly. How they manage keys, for example, we don't know, we can't say.
So can you drop a hint about, I think it's in on your later slides, but one of your assumptions has to do with you expect some sort of agreement between gateways or between networks, just like there's agreements today between routers, right? All BGP sessions usually have some sort of MOU or something at least.
Right. So we've grouped the assumptions into like 3 groupings. The first one is the identity of the Alice Bob, the originator and the receiver, and the gateway operator. So there's four people, 4 entities there. We assume that the identities have been resolved, that they know each other, that the gateway providers know each other. That's grouping 1. Grouping 2, they understand the type and kind of the digital asset being moved. Right? So they understand what's happening. It's not like, hey, there's this blob coming across. We don't know what that means. So that's assumed. And then the third one is there's some legal framework to guide them, just the way, and it's a bad analogy, the CPS statement for X509, it's a legal document. Today, in many trading networks in the financial institution, they have agreements and contracts between networks. So we assume, I mean, they exist, but not in this space, but for this new type of digital asset, new type of network, we assume they also exist. So those are 3 groupings that we've just, it's like identity management is beyond us. We can't solve that problem. We assume it already exists.
Can you clarify what you mean by auditability? In particular, are you auditing for double spending?
Can I clarify?
You said this can be externally audited. And
yes.
my question is what are the guarantees we're attempting to apply here?
So the idea of audit here is that if there is some kind of suspicious activity occurring, right? This is what happens today in the real world, okay? If there is unusual transaction patterns across, say, the SWIFT network, and huge amounts of money moving suddenly, and the trends look, there's an anomaly there. The FBI, or I think it's whoever issues SARS warrants, they can issue a warrant and say, we want to look at that particular transaction, right? So they must be able to come in, and the gateway providers and network members might be able, and Alice and Bob, they have to be able to say, here's the transaction that occurred on November 1st at 1 a.m. This is what it is. So they need to be able to look at that.
Wow, that's not really what I was not expecting you to say. I wouldn't call it auditability, I call it surveillance. These are quite different concepts. So,
Yeah, well, you could argue SWIFT is also being surveilled, and the credit card networks are being surveilled. We're not trying to solve that problem. That's above my pay grade. So
well, I guess what I'm pushing on is that being a requirement, as opposed to not trying to solve it is different from being a requirement.
So let me ask you a question.
Happy to talk this later, but like I was genuinely not anticipating the answer to the question, so I'm a little.
No, it's fine. So, but one of the things that I think came out in this Bach presentation was that list of assumptions that was missing last time, and actually a lot of it came from your comment last time, Eric, because you said that you weren't able to evaluate the nature of the security of the transaction without the assumption. So one of the assumptions here is if you're going to transfer something from one digital bank to another digital bank, how do you guarantee in the future, how can somebody verify that there isn't a duplication that you just mentioned?
Well, that's what I was expecting him to say, but that's not what he said.
Whatever he said.
No, this is like really an important point. No. Like it's one thing to be the case that Bank A says you made a transfer and Bank B says I didn't. And that's a question of like non-repudiation. And then another thing entirely is some law enforcement agency is able to go and monitor every transaction. This is like entirely different technical concepts. So which one is it? Which was the requirement?
So I don't want to answer for him because I'm.
Yeah,
not
so
interested.
it's contractual as.
Okay, but then are we retracting the claim about the FBI?
No. So this is contractual between the two banks that if there's some dispute, they both agree to be audited. That's how the banking networks work today.
Well, okay, but that's not what you. Wait.
Well,
when I asked you this question,
my apologies. Maybe I'm just speaking too fast. But yeah.
okay, when I asked you this question, what you said was the requirement was that if there's suspicious activity, that they can go and like look at the transaction stream, and like you said, too many transactions. Like that's a surveillance property. It's not a not a contract enforcement property, and so so to be very concrete, like it's you can imagine building a system that had end-to-end encryption and had installed non-repudiation and therefore did not have the surveillance property. And in fact, like that might be a desirable property. So I'm trying to push up what the actual requirements are.
Yeah. So our focus is the protocol, right? So how the players play in the real world, whether they misbehave, they try to do something illegal, that's out of scope for us. We're an engineering group. That's why I can't answer you, because this is a world problem. Like the word surveillance, I can't answer.
No, but this is a question of engineering requirements. The question of engineering requirements is it a requirement that people outside the sender and receiver of your transaction be able to monitor the transactions?
Authorized, if you look at the sentence, authorized entities. So both sides needs to agree that the government is allowed to come in, right? This is by contract. So if one side says, "Oh, I don't want the government to come in," well, the other side might say, "I don't want to do any transactions with you." That's how it works today, and almost tangential to what SATP.
No, but
this is what exists today.
Again, we may need to take this offline because this is still like a very confusing answer to me.
Maybe.
Yeah. So let's let the queue
you.
follow.
Yeah.
Quickly answer that, Dennis.
Maybe having two sides in what you said. The first is the consistency of the protocol itself. So if we spot specific assets with specific identities, Dennis Avrillionis, I'm the note taker.
Somebody take notes, please.
So if we are addressing the problem of having double spending and spotting the double spending because we know the identity of the assets, this is part of what we're doing. Now, having a malicious attempt of a bank spending twice deliberately because of any reason, this is outside the scope.
This does not leave any of us confused.
So let's get back to the queue, and Eric, if you want to get in the queue again, let's do it that way. But I think your point is
point taken.
Your point is valid that there are different types of verifiability, and in the legal construct would need to specify what type it might be, whether it's always open or whether it's auditable per record. Rick?
Rick van Rijn, Open Fortress. What you explain is that you assume all sorts of things from the networks that you connect. You want them to gateway. I could imagine the gateways just be connected directly and do nothing in between. What I haven't gotten clear is what sort of state do you want to store? What sort of procedures are you trying to establish? What sort of certainties do you want to give? What are the problems you are solving? That's not completely clear.
So the scope, again, I'm the first to admit, this is a big chunk of the pie. The little chunk we're trying to solve is that yellow bit where we're trying to ensure that when an asset is being requested to be moved, that doesn't exist in two places. There's no double spending. That's the first one. And that if there's any message losses or gateway crashes, that there's sufficient data in the flow that one or both can recover or just resume or restart the whole thing, right? So it needs to be safe, right? This is the asset properties, that safety and an asset. That's kind of what we're shooting for, just for that. And that's why we have to assume away all the setup and security and the three groupings. That is what we call stage 0 or phase 0. All of that needs to have happen before we can even run the program. I hope that it's primarily double spending and crash recovery is kind of high on our goal.
Yeah, and I would say double spending is something that the various systems on both ends already specialize in, but you want to take care of any discrepancies in state experience due to, for example, crashing. That's clear. Thank you.
Yeah, consistency. That's right. So, sorry about it's the formal language. Asset consistency. Yeah. Leaf.
Hey, Leif Johansson. So this is a comment on Eric's point that I guess the thing I want to say is that it should come as no surprise that financial markets or financial industry is more regulated than other types of exchanges. So it probably is not, it wouldn't be surprising to build a protocol that contains much more of surveillance, even though those properties might even be undesirable internally to some of these networks. That may not be properties that you can maintain when you transfer between networks. And this also made me think about sort of the reason I came to take a look at this. I'm co-chair of the Tigers working group. And if you look at that, it's kind of also one of these move stuff between wallets. In that case, it's a personal wallet. And I'm not 100% sure that these are always valuable distinctions. And I think one of the things we should think about sort of in an activity like this is whether there is significant overlap between, you know, other IETF activities. Right? If you want to like make a very, very silly strawman argument, I mean, you have some ACID properties when you transfer a domain name as well. It's in registrars. That doesn't necessarily mean we should go and build Bitcoin to Ethereum transfer on EPP, right? That may be a bit too silly, right? But there's definitely like a line where it becomes silly to kind of build two transfer protocols just because one wallet is in the hand of an individual and the other type of wallet is in kind of an org wallet or whatever you want to call it. So I would actually like to have a conversation about sort of, are we actually already doing this somewhere else in the IETF, and we could just adapt whatever we're doing in some other place to do this as well.
So that's solution farming. So at this point, we have two different queues, and they're very different. Paul?
No, I'm actually Paul here.
You're Paul, okay.
I couldn't get my queue thing to work.
All right, so Roman, you're next, and then Colin, and then we'll let you do it, but do note that you're normally supposed to join the virtual queue, but I'm going to honor the virtual queue first because that's what we're supposed to do. So
Yeah.
I'm okay.
okay, go ahead.
Sorry, it's my first.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
So my name is Gilbert Verdian. I am a cybersecurity background. Reason why I'm here today is I established the ISO blockchain standard TC307 in 2016. There's 57 countries working on that today. So that is an international standard which as ISO is the right venue for. What ISO is doing is at the top level in terms of governance, in terms of descriptive standards, and there's already quite a few out. I actually chair interoperability within ISO in Working Group 7, and what we're doing is creating an interoperability framework, and that basically is what are the building blocks that different vendors and participants need to create in order to create standards that the industry can adopt. It's not prescriptive. It's not saying the packet should be 64K, it should have a checksum of this, and it should have a NAC handshake of that. It's not prescriptive in that sense. And that's where institutions and bodies like IETF come in. And what we kind of expect is the technical engineering to be done within engineering organizations like IEEE and IETF, and that feeds in to the standard that's coming out of ISO already. So I'm very supportive of this, and I'd really like to kind of bring some experience working in banking and in government on the cybersecurity side. One of the comments made is this a type of surveillance? I would argue no, it's not a type of surveillance. It's a protocol enabling interoperability between different types of networks. Who uses that network has to sign up to some scheme rules, and this is consistent with what happens in card networks, payment networks, SWIFT type banking networks. So if there's an issue, it's up to the participant to respond to that suspicious activity, resolve a dispute between them, and they're all in writing in contracts within the different participants within the scheme. So the way it works is you're not relying on the technical protocol to solve your problem, you're relying on human interaction and contractual rules to solve the problem. So this protocol is not here to solve that issue, it's here to solve the technical interconnectivity between these different networks. And one final thing to say is digital assets, what we've got in ISO as a defined vocabulary standard. So this is in ISO CD 22739 terminology, And digital assets have been defined as an asset that exists only in digital form or that has been converted from some other form to a digital representation. Now, these digital assets are here today and they're not going away. What we've seen from working with central banks and other banks at the company I work in at Quant is there's a $16 trillion opportunity with digital assets by 2030. So people are digitizing what they've, some form of asset that used to be in a different form into a digital form, and that's not going away. But the problem which I saw from 2015, 2016 was people are making these in isolation and people are making these in silos. So how can these assets interoperate and how can they interconnect between the different networks? And IETF is the right venue to create the protocol to do it.
All right, thank you. Roman?
Hi, Roman Danilio, Carnegie Mellon University. No hat. I couldn't get my laptop to connect, so Paul put me in the queue. So back to helping tease out this double kind of spend problem. We use lots of different words, so I want to try my attempt at pulling this apart. The question is, when we talk about how is the double spending problem kind of resolved, to me, is all of that in scope or some of it out of scope? So I could imagine a world where you could use different fancy kind of cryptography, different kind of acknowledgements where the things that are getting exchanged, that's all packed in scope in the protocol, and that's how you do how you address the double spending problem. What I think I heard you say is that there are part of that verification process is out of scope. So when you said surveillance, I think what you were saying, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the gateways have to produce an audit log. So the end-to-end double spend verification is actually not a product of the protocol. There are just some requirements about telemetry or whatever the word you want to use that the protocol will squirt. And to get the double spend verification actually is something that's out of scope of the problem, of the protocol and of the working group. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. So we've been talking about two classes of logs. So the gateways need to log for message completeness and proof that both sides have done the right thing per the RFC, the draft definition, and then it needs to log for crash recovery. Now, there might be some overlap in terms of the same data log to be reused for another, but we talk about two sets. But you're right, Roman. That's kind of, you're right.
Yeah, so what my request would be, if as we kind of talk through this, when we talk about the security properties, if we could distinguish the enablers that the protocol will have versus what the protocol itself will kind of guarantee, and that might help us with what's in scope and what's not, and as we nail this.
Good point.
Colin?
Colin Jennings, Cisco. I was trying to think whether Rowan's just answered my question, but so the question I was going to ask is, so is the assumption here is that the participants in a given network trust the gateway not to double spend due to legal agreements or whatever else they have in place, not due to protocol cryptographic things?
Correct.
Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So gateways have to sign stuff. They're going to use TLS, but if they're sending crucial messages, there'll be signatures and so on. But yes, quick answer, yes.
Yeah, thank you, Colin. That's an important point. All right, with that, I think we'll shift to use cases next. There are two. Again, we will ask for clarifying after each one. These should have less clarifying questions. So really just clarifying questions about the use case, not about the protocol itself. That will come later. And that's the wrong one, isn't it? Is that the right one? Okay.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can, yep.
Yep. All right. Can you move to the first slide, please?
Yep.
All right. So hi, everyone. I'm Rama. I was present at the last IETF meeting at Philadelphia, where I see several people here who were present there as well. And I talked about use case involving global trade and supply chains. So I'm just going to talk about the same use case here with a bit more context and try to show you how it's not like a very niche problem, but rather it's a problem that's very highly relevant to ensuring that supply chains that we're all dependent on work properly in the upcoming digitized and distributed energy world. So just providing a bit more context than I did the previous time. The global trade as has been conducted the past few centuries, and several processes have cropped up in the space, have been built around paper. Naturally, I mean, we did not have computers until a few decades ago, right? So these paper-based processes are quite manual and they're time-consuming, and the any clearance or any finalization of a transaction takes too long, and it can often be susceptible to fraud by different participants. And there are a lot of those participants in a particular supply chain. You'll see that in a subsequent slide. The shippers or the sellers and the buyers, or we can think of them as importers and exporters, who are usually always in different countries, they face a lot of costs when it comes to fulfilling an international export-import transaction. So there's a lot of incentive to reduce the cost, make this more efficient, because finally that will result in benefits to all of us as end consumers. The way trade happens in this analog world, it gives very little ability to forecast any disruptions that a supply chain faces in real time. So any mishap that occurs, it takes a while for the ramifications to be discovered, and then it takes a long time for debugging and root cause analysis. Again, speaking in the analog world. Also, given that you have a lot of different players spread across different countries, participating in different institutions that have their own privacy rules, sharing information across these parties and across institutions is a very challenging task. And digitization is something that is solely necessary for all of these different reasons. Next slide, please. So I'll zoom into one particular problem that is very salient whenever any two parties conduct a trade. And imagine an exporter and importer, or let's call them buyer and shipper. If think of the problem at its most basic, a buyer and a shipper, or let me call them buyer and seller. A buyer makes a deal with the seller that if the seller sends the buyer a particular set of goods, then the buyer is obligated to make a particular amount of payment. Now, this is challenging across two different countries, because the question always is who blinks first. If the seller ships the goods first, what guarantees does it have that the buyer is going to make a payment? And if the buyer instead makes the payment first, what guarantees does it get that the seller is going to actually ship the goods? So what's happened in the past few centuries really are processes that have evolved since the dawn of banking to manage these processes, to safeguard this process for both the buyer and seller. And one of those documents that is used in to safeguard the process called the bill of lading. So what happens here is that the buyer usually takes a short-term loan from some financial institution. Let's say it's a bank that has international connections, with whom the buyer has an account, possibly, or perhaps not. But the buyer can take a loan from that financial institution in order to pay the seller. In effect, what happens here, and if you use there are processes like the letter of credit that the buyer can use to get such a loan issued from the financial institution, whereby the financial institution actually agrees to take liability on behalf of the buyer, thereby making a promise to the seller and also the financial institution backing the seller to make a payment once the seller ships the goods. So what is the role does this bill of lading document play? The bill of lading document is something that the seller generates in conjunction with the carrier who takes possession of the goods once the goods are ready to ship. And this bill of lading is proof that the seller has parted with the goods. And what happens after that is, anybody who produces the bill of lading before the buyer, in effect, has a guarantee from the buyer that the buyer will make the payment as it's obliged to. In reality, what happens is it's actually the financial institution backing the buyer who's supposed to make that payment. So the bill of lading is a very crucial document because it constitutes proof that will conclude an import-export transaction. Goods are shipped. It shows that goods are shipped, and it it obligates somebody to make a payment. So the financial institutions needs this bill of lading as collateral. By the way, there's a lot of finance involved in this. Bill of lading can be used as collateral. It can be sold, traded off as a financial asset on its own. We don't have to worry about that. We're just worried about the problem where we want to ensure a safe transaction. So the financial institution, in this case, needs the bill of lading as collateral, so it knows that there is proof of the goods having been shipped, but it cannot change the permission network. Okay, what does that mean? Usually, in the way we've seen in the process of digitization of these processes in the past few years, is that the financing part of a trade is carried out in one particular network, whereas the shipping part and the generation of the bills of documents like the bills of lading is carried out in a different network. And these two networks are opaque to each other. They are oblivious of each other, and they were built separately for particular reasons. There are privacy reasons why the consortia that maintain these networks choose to be separate. And we see that trend continuing. So the financial institutions needs to see the bill of lading, but it cannot actually peer into the permission network. So what does it do? The way we can bridge two networks is via gateways, the kind that Thomas talked about, and and these networks need to be interoperable for all the reasons that Gilbert so eloquently put in his comment short while ago. So this bill of lading data must be reported from the network that is running the trade logistics via a gateway that acts as a neutral service provider on behalf of that logistics network that is maintaining the bill of lading. Okay. Next slide, please.
All right, so there's one question at the microphone that I think they have on.
Yeah.
Leaf, you have a question on this slide, I take it?
Yes, I have a clarifying question.
Please.
So on this slide, to me, it kind of looks like what's really described there is sort of a transparency problem that is kind of already in scope for the SCIT working group. So so what I would like to understand better is how this really is as described here, how this really is a transfer of an asset. To me, it sounds like it's the bill of lading. The financial institution needs like a trusted way to look into the bill of lading network and see that BL exists. And that to me sounds like a transparency issue, not a transfer of asset.
Yeah, these are actually rated.
Yeah.
So let me answer that one, Rama. There are three types of flows that we have if you look at the draft charter. The first one I was talking about was an actual asset transfer. And this one is what we call asset-related data sharing. I've been talking about extracting data. Now, the problem is that although the bank may want that bill of lading, today you actually have to bring a printout.
Understood. Yeah.
Yeah. That's.
I understand the requirement.
Yeah,
I think that.
So this is extracting the relevant fields from the state data.
Understood. Yeah. My question is whether we should maybe actually focus on the actual transfer situations, because the transparency case is already covered in the SCIT working group.
I've been participating in this SCIT working group, and I'll be the first to say there is a lot of similarities with this information transfer, extraction, and SCIT.
Yeah. So let me put it another way, right? If we can reuse parts that are in another, IETF area, that's exactly what we always do. And the question to me is whether they need to be bound together or whether they can be two different protocols. And so I'll leave that to the future. But Roman.
Roman Danilio as cognizant AD of the SCIT working group. The scope of SCIT is the software supply chain. We talked a lot about dual use or kind of using it outside of that use case, but that's all we're chartered to do.
Thank you, John. And then we should get on to the rest of the presentation.
John Robotham, EY. I think the key thing here is that there is an asset on at least one side of the gateway. And I think that's the key thing is that the control of that asset, whatever that asset does, which is the financial side of it, requires the information on the other side. So it's not purely transparency. I think that might be a distinguishing characteristic.
Okay, thank you. I actually have a question now, but I'll return it to the presentation.
Sure. Just to conclude that point, yeah, it's not just about transparency. So what we don't have. I mean, we can probably go into this later in the presentation or during the discussion. Think of you have you have a network here that is maintaining a document like the bill of lading. This bill of lading now has this the information in this bill of lading is quite crucial to concluding a process that is beyond the scope of that particular network. So we need somebody or some process by which this information that bill of lading exists, and that and here are the properties of this bill of lading, and here is authentic proof that this bill of lading is actually hosted on this network, which is not opaque to parties that are beyond its confines. That is really crucial, and in effect, what we're trying to do is to figure out a view of to provide a view into this bill of lading to parties that do not actually belong to this network, that who are not parties, who are not the buyer, not the seller, not the financial institution backing the buyer, not the carrier that is uh, uh, has taken possession of the goods that the seller has provided. So that's what this example tries to illustrate. You have a financial institution that is outside this supply chain and trade logistics permission network, and that needs to know, it needs to have a view into what's going on in the logistics part of the trade. So it requests for the bill of lading, and now it can in effect, what it's trying to do is trying to request the network to provide, to say, show me your bill of lading. But what we need is some standardized way to do this, because the bill of lading, and we'll see later on, there's a laundry list of such documents. It's not just one kind of document that we want to be able to expose via these from these such kind of networks. It's just any kind of document, any kind of asset, or any kind of artifact whose properties need to be visible in a controlled way outside that network. And the gateway is the way we do that. Gateway provides a neutral way of exposing views from private networks. So that's what this, in a nutshell, this slide is showing.
Okay,
I see
so
there are
let me interrupt you for, yeah, let me interrupt you for 1 second. So two things. One, we probably need to speed up a little bit. I think the slides are, you're over describing them a little bit, and we're going to run out of time. Two, for the people at the queue at the moment, is it relevant to this slide or the whole concept? If it's the whole concept, let's take it after the presentation.
It's this slide for me.
Okay.
Yeah, Roman Janelu, No Hat, Carnegie Mellon University. A little bit like Leaf and this use case. I'm trying to square the definition of an asset, which is value bearing something, I forgot the rest of the words, and a bill of lading, because maybe in my head, a bill of lading is an inventory, or is this like a bearer token?
Yeah, it's a deed. It's your house deed.
Okay, so I hold the bill of lading. I get to have everything on the ship just because I hold a piece of paper. Thank you.
Yes.
Eric?
Okay, we can move on to the next slide, please.
Oh no, but I'm actually now I'm confused. Because so I guess the part I'm confused about is that I thought this is about transferring assets. I'm expecting to see a G on the other side of this as opposed to like a little bank. And
could you move the slide forward? Yeah, could you move forward two slides forward? There's another diagram.
Did you say 2 slides or 1 slide?
Next one.
Okay,
yes,
so this is the thing that we are doing now, and the other thing with background.
No, that's half of it. Okay, let me say. So you can combine this in 2 different ways. You have what we're showing here. If you go from left to right, there's a bill of lading on the network on the left, which is being exposed through gateway G1, and there's a letter of credit on the network to the right, which is being exposed by gateway G2. What we're showing in this use case is a composition of both of them, and both of them, if we combine them together, we're showing what can be possible in the supply chain and finance world.
Okay, but I guess what I'm being confused by is, like, if we have an assertion of this bill of lading that is, if I understand it, being transferred from the seller to the buyer, like surely we don't want to have a bearer token, which we're then going to provide to the bank, who could then take all my stuff, right? That's not a desirable outcome, right?
No, no, no. Maybe I didn't explain properly. So the bill of lading on the network to the left, it is actually something negotiated between the seller and the carrier. The carrier actually not shown here. So when the seller ships goods via a particular carrier, they have done that part in the export import. So the carrier is now supposed to provide a bill of lading to the seller, which the seller can then take to any financial institution and say, look, not any financial institution, in this case, the buyer's financial institution, and say, look, I shipped the goods, here's the proof, you got the bill of lading, now make my payment. That cannot happen in networks which are siloed like this, which are isolated like this. But that's the world we live in. You have networks which only run store bills of lading. You have other networks that only where the financial institutions have play a part. That's a network on the right. So how do they share? How do they share this information so that their respective processes can continue without in a trustworthy manner? So that's why you need gateways, so that gateways acting on behalf of two different networks can communicate information or in effect views of a particular record across the network boundaries, that is from one network to another, in a way that does not require the two networks to understand each other's internals. So the gateways communicate.
Yeah, I understand this point, but that's not answering my question. My question is simply about, is this a bearer token, and if it's a bearer token, then why am I showing it to the bank?
It's not a bearer token. So this is flow number 2. It's extracting information to show to the financial entity that this tool exists on the network. And so Gateway G1 needs to sign this data. It's not an asset itself. It's a report. It's a subset of the fields that are in the data.
Well, that's the part I.
Okay. Sorry.
So
no, it's not a bearer token. No.
So, all right, yes, this is, I'm equally confused as Becker. So, just a control question for either. Okay. Thomas, sorry. So, you said to Roman that it's sort of like the deed to my house. Yeah. But does the bank or the financial institution in this example, do they own my shipment when I take the loan?
Technically speaking, they own the deed, yes. So it's a short-term loan.
So you give them the deed to your
to
stuff
my house,
on the ship.
I give
to the stuff on the ship. They give you a loan
to pay the shipper.
Right. But it's not that you're actually giving them ownership.
Temporarily, yes, legally.
But you are giving them ownership.
Yes.
So it is transfer.
So actually, this is what they do today. Okay?
No, I understand,
I'm not making this up. This is not.
That's fine.
It's not in our problem scope
I'm not trying to change what. I'm just trying to understand it, because what my argument was that it was a transparency issue. That it's about showing that you have stuff on the ship and the rights to own it,
yes,
which is different from giving it to the bank. You now own it, and that's the thing. All right, I'm getting clear answers from you. Thank you.
So there are two different things that are going on here. So let's not get confused. So there's a process of trade financing, which involves a buyer taking out a loan with the financial institution, and the financial institution thereby, if it gets a bill of lading, which is like the title to the shipment, then yes, the financial institution gets to keep the shipment until the buyer can pay off the loan. But what we're talking about here is the fact that you have the financial part of a trade of an export-import running on one particular network whose activities are opaque to the external world. And then you have the shipment or the logistics part of it running on a different network, which is again opaque to anybody outside of it. How do you connect the two? We have to make them interoperable. The way we make them interoperable or allow them to provide restricted views into their records, which in this case involves bills of lading on the left network, letters of credit on the right side network. You do that using these gateways, which can communicate using a neutral protocol.
Rama, I think we need to move forward.
Yeah, so in interest of time, I think that we need to probably switch to the other use case, which is possibly a little bit simpler.
Yeah, I'll just make a quick point on the last slide, the next last two slides, and then you can turn to it. Thanks, Wes. So the documents we've been talking about, right? Bill of lading, letters of credit. These are, you might think these are like niche use cases we're talking about, but no. Just in the trade space, you have a laundry list of documents that you see here. And if you have networks that need to interoperate for providing views into such documents, the same security problem will arise in each of those use cases. And if you go to the next slide, you have a lot of different parties that are involved in this kind of ecosystem, and this gets very complex very fast unless we have a neutral protocol that allows two different networks to interoperate via gateways. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm having a browser difficulty that I have to overcome here. I don't know what deck is being shared. I bet it's the wrong one. I need to restart my browser, unfortunately. If you're on, you could. Now this is a weird too many X files open socket problem. Come on. Agenda. Sorry about this. Why don't you start talking about your use case while I'm almost there.
Okay. This is the right place for the microphone. Cool. So I will wait a little bit.
You need to eat the microphone.
Just a little closer?
Yep,
oh,
there
wow.
you go.
Okay, that's not too bad. Okay, cool. So Martin Hargreaves, I'm from Quant. I'll be talking about the asset transfer use case, which is obviously the main use case for this protocol. I'll wait for the slides a little bit, but effectively, I'll start talking anyway. So the financial services market is moving in the direction of tokenization, which is a bit of a buzzword, but effectively means digitally representing a variety of assets and then trading them, particularly things that couldn't be traded before. So there are assets out there which can be traded, which represent things like future revenue flows, right? So you can buy a fraction of the income that you will get when this thing comes to market. There's a supercar manufacturer that does this. That's how they fund the build of their cars. Likewise, real estate is being fractionalized. Lots of things are being fractionalized. This is a big trend in financial services. And these new digital tokens are being traded on a new class of trading venues, effectively marketplaces. So they are not connected. They're built on a new generation of technology. Some of it is distributed ledgers, some of it is not. But the main point about it is that they are mostly not being connected to each other. From a industry point of view, there's quite strong network effects in this kind of thing. So you see in the more established markets, there's quite a lot of big trading venues. They connect to each other. Likewise, internet, lots of ISPs connect to each other. Where the things are proprietary, you have marketplaces like eBay, Alibaba, and literally nothing else, right? So network effects can play in your favor or not. We've got slides, awesome. So this is this walled garden problem that we are looking at the moment, because there are dozens to, in larger economies, low digit hundreds of new venues coming up. And the way I like to think of them, they are like marketplace, right? So if you created one of these tokens and you want to sell it, it's analogous to something like eBay, right? So we were talking about this before, and it's effectively, if I want to sell a GPU, right, and I want to sell it on eBay, then that's fine. Anyone on eBay can buy it. But if I've got a buyer who is on Alibaba, something like that, how do I let them see it? What we are trying to do is basically be able to show it on the other venue, be able to people to buy it on the other venue. The digital representation travels transparently from one to the other, fulfillment happens. And the reason why we're trying to do that is because there's not just eBay and Alibaba, there's a lot of these things. So as someone who is issuing this token who wants to sell it, I want as many people as possible to be able to buy it. And those people are not all going to be customers of the one or two places that I'm a customer of. So we want to link all of these things to create a larger market effect. I think, so what do we have? Yes, fragmented markets, poor issuers, investors here are the buyers and the sellers. Limited liquidity potential means there's less people to buy it. And in the case of these sorts of assets, that kind of creates a lot of inefficiency, which usually means somebody can buy it for cheap on this one and they can sell it for expensive on that one, and all they're doing is making a bit of profit out of the arbitrage. They're not adding any value, and it isn't a very efficient market. Next slide. Cool. So what we are trying to do this is to connect all of these networks, right? So as they're coming up at the moment. Some of them, like Thomas said, there are some bilateral solutions. There are some vendor and proprietary driven solutions, and none of them really have any attempt at standardization, really, other than we will try and get as many users as possible and be the next eBay. What we want to see is a technically driven standard that allows anybody to connect to a more open network. I think that is fine for that slide. I will try and make up a little bit of time. Excellent. So this is, in terms of what are the things that we're talking about, there's a few things. So institutional tokenization is what I was talking about. They have a lot of their own jargon in this world. So issuance of interoperable digital assets. I would like to sell my GPU on eBay, and here is the data item that you will buy and which will give you the right to it. That includes things like physical things, like it says there, real estate, gold. It also includes money these days, and that's where CBDCs come in. That's a token that doesn't get redeemed for anything, and a variety of other tokenized money, which is money that can be redeemed for things. And we have a question. Okay.
I finished the slide.
Oh, we've lost the slide now.
Well, that I can't
My
fix.
list of examples. Well, this is probably a good time for a question.
Yeah.
It's the slide.
So you mentioned earlier that some of these assets are on blockchain type networks. Is in order for that to work, so because of the structure as I understand it, what that would mean is that the smart contracts associated with those blockchains would have to basically allow the gateway to override ownership.
No, so in the protocol, so not all of them will be on blockchain networks.
Sure.
Most
But
of
even
those
if they
will be
were
private. What the protocol needs is for the gateway to have some form of trust of the network, and that's an implementer problem, right? So if it's a smart contract that provides a guarantee to it, that's fine. If it's something else, that's fine as well. So the trust relationship that we were talking about earlier, the gateway needs to trust the network, and there will be a liability relationship between them, and the gateways trust each other with a separate liability relationship. So there's
right, but it's actually
two trust relationships there.
Sure,
one in the
right, but in this case, it's the network trusting the gateway. So like, I mean, if we're like thinking
like
NFTs, right, then the way the NFT would be constructed is that the gateway has the power to take anybody's NFT and just take it, right?
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. Excellent, cool. So we will come on to, we talked about the size of the market. Well, I didn't, but the slide did, which is in the multi-millions, low billions today, expected to rise to trillions. So some of the players in this area tend to be the large global banks. And which one was it? Gilbert will know. Starts with an S. They have got around 300 billion, something like that. Their plan is in the next 2 years to tokenize all of the assets that they hold. So securities, everything. So it is a major trend. BNY Mellon have put about 200 million into building platforms for this over the last couple of years. At Quant, what we did last month, actually, we were in a hackathon. We implemented SATP in its draft form. So the hackathon was run by Swift. For those that don't know, Swift is the network. It's an organization, that's shared ownership organization. So all the banks in the world own it. It's got about 22,000 owners. They run across 4 highly redundant MPLS networks. They back off to a whole bunch of different providers. They've got a lot of data centers, and they provide highly resilient messaging services for the whole financial services industry, basically. They're also interested in this, right? So the hackathon had 2 things. One was about custody, didn't really care about that. The other one was about interoperability between networks. So we do care about that. That's kind of what we do. They also have been running their own internal thing on this. So they had their own announcement. They've been doing interoperability between 2 different networks using Swift's infrastructure. They've spent 10 months on that. That is their proprietary one, built around their message set. For this one, it was more open. So we, the quant piece on there is labeled gateway, and SATP is how we connected these things. And this one was 2 different networks representing effectively a source and a destination. The use case was around, it was tokenized gold. There's folks that are sitting on vaults full of gold who think, well, we can tokenize this and we can use it as a currency, and they are trying to do that. So this is what they're trying to do in that case. There's about 120 participants in it. BNY Mellon won it in the end because they throw a lot of money at it. We were joint 3rd with NatWest on that one. So there's a lot of UK banks. There's a lot of interest in this area. So from a use case point of view, I guess the message really here is that the industry is doing this, and they're doing it at scale, and they're doing it in a fairly proprietary format. There are other standards groups out there that are not doing the protocol side. So as Gilbert said, ISO are doing terminology, framework, that sort of thing. There's tons of projects that think their way is the only way, right? So particularly in the blockchain world, each of the camps think interoperability is everybody uses their system. And we were at Sibos last week, which is the Swift conference, which is roughly the size of RSA. We spoke to a lot of people there. They are mostly holding off because there is no interoperability. People are doing a lot of pilots, a lot of POCs, and they're waiting to see if there's a winner or if there's a standard piece of interoperability. So there's a few people going live in Q1 at the moment, but this is what everyone's waiting for, and it's the technical standard that we need.
Okay, any questions about this presentation?
Any questions? I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
All right, let's go back to Thomas with the status report of what they have been doing for the past 3 months.
So we've taken a lot of input since the last IETF in Philly, and we've been having basically weekly meetings on this. So progress, we've been documenting the assumptions, because in fact that was the big question I think coming out of Philly is what's the assumption? And we've been saying, well, what we call phase 0, what needs to happen before this flow runs. So we've been documenting that. We've been collecting use cases. We have a use cases document. In fact, we've got the Digital Dollar Project, DDP in Washington, D.C. that's going to contribute text to our use case document. I asked them to give me 3 paragraphs, and they gave me 4 pages. So my job is to sit down with them and sort out through 4 pages. We just need 3 paragraphs. We've been working on the common message flow for the asset transfer. So for those who are looking at our GitHub, there's a figures folder, and there's a flow diagram. I think the file is like version 15 now. So we've been talking about this probably since before Philly, but since Philly, we've been meeting weekly. And that particular message flow is sort of the sort of highly discussed subject or topic of our meeting. We also have a draft charter that is up available on our GitHub repo. Next slide, please. Thanks. So we finally got agreement among ourselves, okay, internal consensus and you could just follow that link there. We want to focus on 2 key flows. So the first flow is the asset transfer flow, and the second one is the data sharing flow, more completely asset related data sharing, what I call data extraction. And we have an architecture document and a use cases document as well. I know it's ambitious. We're shooting for 18 months. But I've been told that's super ambitious, but okay. Put a line on the sign and say 18 months. Next slide, please. So prior to Philadelphia, we would be meeting twice a month. So it was a bi-weekly meeting. But since Philly, we've been doing weekly. And personally, I was surprised. I was surprised people were willing to meet, every week, every Tuesday morning, and some people like, thank you, Rama. People in India, they were on like 8 p.m., and there's 3 guys in Australia, and it's like 11 p.m., in Australia. So they've been joining, and I kind of feel bad for the Australia crew and the India side. But this is kind of the rough stats, and it's just Excel, and I just cut and paste Excel. But on average, it's about 10 attendees, which is, I thought, well, this is pretty good, right? You'll see some dips there at the end of August, when, had like 5 people, and that was because it's vacation season, last chance for a vacation before September. It's open to all. The Zoom is recorded, so you can, go back, and the link's on the mailing list. So you can go back and listen to the Zoom recording. Next slide, please. So people ask, well, how come we don't have like, a gazillion mail items against, it's because we use the Zoom session. We talk about stuff, and that's why we record it. I know it's not sort of IETF tradition to be recording Zoom. I personally think it's been, for me, going over stuff, having the Zoom recording has been great. I mean, sometimes I have to like put in the minutes or fix the notes, and having the Zoom recording kind of helps, remember what I said, what other people said. Next slide, please. So the set of assumptions, we have a thread there on the mailing list. You can have a look at that. We've been collecting this, and this is, I said earlier, there was a question earlier about the assumptions. We've grouped them into 3 categories. All of them are out of scope, but we know it needs to happen. So legal framework side, what is the asset definition? What's an asset? And in different networks, in different industries, it might be different. And entity, we don't want to do identity management. We don't want to do anti-money laundering and all that stuff. That's out of scope for us. But that's gotta. And if anyone has, additional sort of assumptions that we think we need to add to this, we're very open, because we can't solve the world's problem. We're just doing the yellow bit in the middle. So I also get this question a lot. It's like, why the IETF? Well, my one-liner is that it's the home of interoperability, right? So this is where, it's number one. Number two, technical review. So like guys like Ecker, right? So, they're gonna scrutinize our specs, which is good. I would prefer to have our drafts to be scrutinized locally instead of having, mistakes in the draft and so on. And, we did look at other organizations. So we looked at the W3C. They're primarily concerned right now about the verifiable credentials, the VC data structures, and the DID. So we kind of said, let's try IETF first. ISO, as you heard from Gilbert, is a pretty high-level organization. They don't really do protocol specs, right? So I need probably to explain. There's a lot of open source projects out there, but I have to say to many of those open source projects, running code is not spec, right? If you go to organizations like Swift, so I was involved, for example, in the cable, open cable industry. When they say a spec, they want a written specification that members have to implement, and they might have to hire somebody to test compliance of the implementation. Right, so this is another reason why the IETF has a history of writing specifications in paper specifications. Yes, we need running code, we know that, but more importantly, nowadays, I need to explain to many people we want written specifications. Next slide. So active supporters, I've grouped them into I, D, and O, implementing, testing, deploying. Many of those organizations say, this is great. When there's a working group, we're going to come and join, right? So this is to me, it's a chicken and egg problem, right? So on one hand, we have to show to you guys here that we have a lot of, people interested, but on the other hand, they say, well, look, hey, why should I send my, chief of innovation to a meeting in IETF when we're not going to get a working group? So it's a chicken and egg problem. But however, having said that, there are people implementing this stuff. You heard Quant. At MIT, we're beginning to do an open source implementation just of the yellow bit. So it's probably just going to be a client server thing, no real gateway. Compellio is doing one. On the inter side, you have, TradeLens and Merx, they have this deployed. Okay, it's a proprietary network, and that was the second use case. This is running, operating. I know this personally because I've been helping with our project. Our group at MIT has been working with the government of Australia in the port of Adelaide, and they're a customer of TradeLens. And so they're interested in this ability to extract out the bill of lading so that the local bank, Westpac Bank or Commonwealth Bank, can actually give a loan to the buyer.
Have you been able to ask these people if they've been willing to work within the
Yes,
IETF?
that's right.
Be
Yes,
part
absolutely.
Of
Yeah, they said like, great. Yeah. Some of them, we know the IETF. Yes, yeah, that's the people who brought us TCP/IP and IPsec and TLS. So yes, they actually would prefer the IETF because the IETF. We're not raising tokens. We're not trying to raise funds. We write technical specifications. We don't own a network. The IETF is a perfect neutral entity.
Thank you.
Okay. Any questions? Okay. This looks like everybody needs coffee.
All right. So with none, I'm going to go back to my chair slides. So there's been a number of discussions. I think the questions around the bill of lading and the more complex use case of how do you prove that you have something and that can be transferred later type of thing is one discussion I heard. I think if there is still questions around what Eric was talking about earlier of do we need to define the level of auditability or observability, that is important for this work to be considered. We don't think we should solve any problems today, right? This is a BOF to see if the IETF is the right place to solve that problem. So with that, I guess the questions I'd prefer to hear now are ones that are challenging any of these statements, right? Is the IETF the wrong place? Is the IETF the right place? Do the problems, is this a problem that needs to be solved? I'm not asking these questions yet in terms of a hum type of approach, but I'm wondering who has challenges to the typical reasons why we hold BOFs, right? We hold BOFs to decide if this working group should be formed, and so I'm very curious if there are questions or comments related to whether or not it should be formed. Leif.
So it's maybe not a question, but maybe something that might be missing, and that is kind of what are the overlaps? I actually came in here believing there were more overlaps than I right now standing here. I think this is kind of fairly well scoped, even though there are also some dangerous sort of aspects to this. I mean, the stuff Eric pointed out that the gateways are kind of in charge, or have to be, right? They have rights to do stuff in the networks. That's a dangerous thing to have around, but it's a fairly well scoped problem for all of that, right? So what I would add to that is, there needs to be a little bit better coordination among the working groups and efforts in the IETF that work on stuff related to digitalization of assets. That involves Tigris, that involves SCIT, that involves something like this, right? It's not an argument against doing anything, right? But it's an argument for making sure that you're tightly scoping whatever you're doing in this working group.
Yeah.
To specifically the use case where the user is not approving stuff. I think that's kind of what I gleaned from Eric's statement. The user isn't necessarily approving the transfer, the gateway is. And that's a significant difference between this and Tigris, where the user is specifically in charge. Anyway.
Not quite true. Actually, in our flow diagram, you'll see that Alice actually says to the gateway, do this. So
yeah, but that's signaling. It doesn't necessarily make it part of the protocol.
Well, so one of the assumptions, right, Thomas, is that the gateway has a lock on the asset before the protocol can begin its transaction.
Before doing a lock, it has to be commanded, instructed by Alice, the asset owner.
How that happens in each network is that
it's different. Yeah, we can't say. Correct. Yeah. Correct. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Leif. Eric.
So this is like, I'm not sure if it's a comment or a question, but as I was last time, I'm very concerned about our competence to solve this problem, and I'm concerned about our pipeline into the people who actually are the consumers of this. I saw a number of companies on that slide. I don't see most of them here. Where are you from? Okay. How many people in that? So if we go back to that slide, how many people actually deploy shipping are on this slide? Are actually here? I'm serious. Like,
how many people are what? Say?
I said, how many people who are not selling this solution but are consumers of the solution are actually here in this room?
So
I invited. So the Swift guys came to Philadelphia. They're back of the room. So it's too much for me to ask for Swift to send 2 people to 2 IETF meetings.
It's not too. No, it is not. No, this is exactly my point. Exactly.
As I said last time, Eric, I can't bring, the first question in Philly, you said, bring in the developers. So I said, I can't bring everybody. And then having said that, you asked the second question, bring me all the consumers. This is a chicken and egg problem.
So no. Like when we I'm sorry, when we ordinarily go and we charter something, we charter under the assumption that the people who are the relevant people, the people who you say don't want to come, will be in the room. And you're telling me they're going to show up eventually, but I'm saying they need to show up now. And if they can't be bothered, even to call in, then actually, no, I think that is like a really, really concerning sign for our ability to actually understand what the requirements are and actually reflect them. And so to have like, and like I've done lots of standards where people kind of like try to remote control this through like there's 3 people I could talk to and they talk to everybody else. And like, and we always tell people this isn't going to work. And I've tried it, doesn't work. So I want to make sure that we actually have the right constituents in the room. And I don't think it's a reasonable ask.
So Eric, thank you. I think your comment is very valid, right? You have to have the people that are willing to do the work. And Thomas talked about there are people willing. Now, I think one of the questions I can put into the final closing questions for you is, because we have to include the remote people, right? So if there are people remote and you know, I didn't ask the question in a way that they could raise their hand. I can add that question toward the end so that we do get a better count of who in the room might be implementing, deploying, or you know, whatever. I think that's a very valid question for whether the BOF, you know, should succeed or not. Roman?
So Wes, I want to help you with queue management. I have a new thread. So if anyone wants to talk about the old thread, I will yield. I will.
Thank you, Roman.
Change my spot in the queue.
I want to disagree with you, Eric. I think it's a little bit unfair to characterize the turnout as weak, if that is what you're doing. I think it's fair for a new effort in a group that is new for most of the companies involved. I think having at least some of them on site is maybe not perfect, but it's definitely an indication that there is interest.
And certainly the level of dialogue that has happened weekly, and including mail messages, you know, is a decent amount of people. Who they represent, I don't know. I'll leave that to the answer. But go ahead.
Thank you. Arnaud Tadei from Broadcom. So yeah, I would like to support the point made by Thomas about the difficulty to hire people in standardization. Even forget the IETF for a second. There is a lot of work going elsewhere about the lack of industry engagement. The big difficulty we find is that when you need to make the case as a developer, as an engineer, as other people to participate, you need to have the buy-in from your management. Most of the Western companies are clueless about standardization. There's another person who mentioned a very good point that open source is not specifications. That's a very good point. People have the impression if you do open source, that's good enough. No. And a lot of the companies don't get that point either. So for them, if you tell them, I need to open an open source project, yes. I need to go to standardization. Why? Cost, money, trips, time you're not going to spend on doing your daylight job, etc., etc. It is extremely difficult. Not that people are not willing, but they have to fight the fight constantly. And even when this is established, when you tell them, we will not get results before years, this is just inaudible for the management of most of the companies. So I understand the point of qualifying, and Aker is right in the sense we have to make sure that we have enough critical mass. I completely understand that, but we have to be careful about how we manage these situations, otherwise we will never start anything anymore.
All right, thank you. Venkat Raman, can I suggest you turn off your video when you're not actively speaking, only because the QR code disappears when you're, and so about 4 people just walked in the room. I want to make sure people can properly register, so the QR code's up there. Raman.
Roman Danelio, Carnegie Mellon University. I turned off my video. So I've got, in a sense, kind of a scoping question. I heard a number of kind of use cases. Some felt very different than the other use cases. So I wasn't clear to me whether one supports the other. They're kind of parallel. So this kind of made me kind of step back. Is there an MVP, a minimal viable product we have? And are some of these, you know, to spin up the MVP we need it, and others are things that we could maybe defer kind of later, and we could get some clarity by focusing on kind of base things that we work on, and then assuming we're successful there, we could do kind of additional work. So I'm not sure whether things are separable.
Let me add to that before I think you're going to get an answer, which is, can we defer the bill of lading problem to our later item?
That would excite me. I mean, that certainly is one that did not feel like the others, but I'm not sure how separable things are, and maybe great to have that kind of conversation.
Yeah. So the answer to that is yes. The MVP is pretty much what we did for the hackathon, which is the asset transfer side of things based on the drafts that we have at the moment. So that's code that's been done. So that would be the MVP by definition at the moment.
Okay. Leaf is. Okay, Gilbert?
I didn't register online. Shall I go first?
You can go first if Gilbert's okay with it. But
Yes, I'm Luke Riley from Quan. I just had a couple of points to make about the trust assumption, because I think there's been a few comments on this. And I just wanted to say why I believe it is good to have it. So I think some speakers have mentioned that the gateway, as we presented, represents previous distributed networks. And obviously there's been a lot of work on that and proven technology, but now we're moving it into the environments where, you know, the network is for read, write, and own. And secondly, if you remove the trust assumption, you start to go down a rabbit hole of decentralization, and you want to think, who are we actually going to now trust? And there's a famous paper, famous to me, in the DLT interoperability space, where there is no complete decentralization. You can never have a complete decentralized network. If I give you an analogy, for similar reasons to why communism wasn't work, as soon as you're completely decentralized, no one's motivated to do anything. So lots of people have been trying different ways of experimenting with decentralization. And if you read the news about blockchain networks, you'll see that lots of the asset transfer protocols have major hacks, cost loads of money, big problems. So that's why the 2 points why I think keeping the trust assumption is a good thing in this protocol.
Thank you. Gilbert?
Thank you. I'd just like to express I guess, an opinion of what I've seen and comparing IETF to when ISO TC307 started. It was less than 10 people who started the initiative in 2015. There was a year worth of work upfront to create the technical committee. And it actually started with a group smaller than this. So I'm really excited and surprised that there's so much initiative behind what's happening with this potential BOF and with what's happening within IETF. And I would like to just, cast your minds 2-3 years from now. If you look at the rate of TC307, there's over 1,000+ subject matter experts across 7 different working groups across 57 countries working on it. So yes, there's a representation of about 65 plus whatever in the room today, about 100. But this could lead to something much bigger, because we're here as an engineering task force, which is what the IETF is, to work on these solutions together over the next few years. And doing it as an RFC is the right way to do it. It's collaborative, it's open, and you don't have to go through lots of rigor to participate. It's quite an accelerated way to bring this engineering work out into market, which is quite exciting. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I see some nodding heads on that. To me, it seems that if this work goes forward, it is likely a lot of this work will be done in interim meetings based on how it's been conducted so far, and it's actually more likely that there'll be monthly interim meetings. Now, just for the people that don't know the IETF process, interim meetings do have to be announced so far ahead, and they can't be too close to IETF meetings. There's a bunch of rules that you will have to start following, other than that. But there is nothing wrong, I don't think, in the IETF to do things in interim meetings, or technically always over the mailing list. I don't think we've had any working groups that had a BOF and then never had a meeting but still got stuff done. But that doesn't mean that it couldn't be done. So, okay. Any other comments before I will go into other random stuff? I have slides of charter text if everybody wants to go back to sleep, but I don't think that's the case. But I will start asking questions soon. But Alyssa?
Thanks, Alyssa Cooper. I do think it's typical to look at the charter. So I was going to ask you if that was going to happen or not. I was just looking at it. And there are, I guess, a couple questions. Well, really just one question about this, which is that it seems to be missing the articulation of the threat model. I don't know where that would land, but to me that seems very important for this work, because there's a lot of talk about assumptions, and I understand there's things being left out of scope to simplify the problem space, but a lot of the threats are derived from those things that are out of scope. So I just feel like that is something that needs to be part of this.
No, I think that is a fantastic point. But I would defer that until, you know, a working item to develop that threat model is if I was in charge, which I'm not, right? I'm just the BOF chair, but that's not something that we would have to have totally isolated today. That.
Oh, no, agree. I'm just saying, like, there's milestones listed, but it's not there.
Yeah, so
Or at least I didn't see it.
yeah,
So,
you're right. There are
um,
milestones, and there is not a threat model on that milestone. I suspect that the proponents would not be object to adding that to the. I'm seeing lots of nodding heads. So.
Yeah. Okay. The other thing, just to come back on, like, who is here to speak about this, it's, to me, it's not, I'm familiar with ISO, and I don't think actually comparing to ISO is valuable when you come to the IETF. It's more about like the types of participants and what their respective roles are in the system. So, sometimes you get like all the people who are there who have a particular slant on the problem, and that colors the design. If you do have the consumers, the asset networks, if they're not there, but they're the ones who are meant to technically be the beneficiaries of this, but all you get are those who are representing those interests, but not those interests themselves, then I think that can be a bad situation. And I say this as, I think, the AD who oversaw the interledger BOF that we had some years ago, which very much had that problem, like people who had only one vested interest who are trying to pitch this. So I don't think it's about the number of people who show up. I think it's about all the entities that are meant to interact in the system being represented in the design process.
Okay, thank you. Leif?
Right. And Alice, that goes to my point of why it might be a little bit different now, because we have all of these other efforts in the IETF where some of those groups are actually present. The software supply chain people, yes, it's scoped to software, but it's kind of I think there's more critical mass in the organization now than there was at the time when you were chartering the interledger thing. Those were the only people there who was working on similar things. I think there's a better chance now.
Thank you. Roman?
Roman Danelio, Carnegie Mellon University, no hat. To finesse what I was asking earlier about the separability of the use cases, and to pull a little bit on what Alyssa was talking about. So I initially was saying MVP. So the question would be, typically you have an MVP, we heard folks are willing to implement that. Who validates that it's the MVP? And that would suggest to me the people that want to adopt it or are going to run it or can say, yes, indeed, those engineering it, you hit the mark for us. So it'd be, I don't know who that is, but it might be nice to have them here.
Well, so I guess the one way to ask that in the flip side is anybody that doesn't think that the digital asset transfer aspect of the problem statements should not be the MVP, because I think that's the consensus, please get in the queue if you disagree with what I just said.
Hey, Ori Steele, Transmute. Because I heard the analogy to some software, the SCIT working group and the software use cases. And over the past couple of days, there's actually been several IETF groups that exist where they had a very narrowly defined initial charter, and they've built very great generic building blocks. And they're talking about a rechartering process for some of their, more extended use cases. And so, just saying that, when we formed SCIT, we talked a lot about hardware and physical supply chain use cases, and we specifically focused on the software supply chain use cases, but the building blocks that we've been designing are with the awareness and engagement from community members who are, following those other use cases as well. And I think it's very relevant to this, and I've seen echoes of that in SUIT and TEEP as well. And if anyone else would like to sort of comment on how that's gone in those other groups, I think that could be helpful, for this group. Thanks.
Agree, particularly the data sharing, what I call the data extraction thing, because they have the same problem that if you have a private, supply chain and there's somebody outside and you want to extract information. So yeah.
And by the way, this leads to failure of architecture in the IETF. When we kind of scope very narrowly in order to kind of get our deliverables in, and then we build generic for a much more generic building blocks, and then we tend to duplicate efforts.
Okay, with,
Yep. So Arnaud Tadei, Broadcom. So I have a question first. So because it's like 25 years, I've not been in a BOF meeting. So when you create that, are you doing some kind of gap analysis versus other SDOs? Because I heard the ISO was mentioned, but there might be other groups that are working on connected pieces to that. And I just can't believe that it would be only here. Is this part of the analysis to prepare working above, or?
so I'll let Thomas answer that, or somebody else. Yeah.
So yes, early on we looked at ITU, ISO, IEEE, W3C, and a couple of others in terms of what they were doing, but also what level they were working at before we settled on IETF, because it is the interoperability protocol between the gateways, and the other, absolutely, other folks are dealing on different layers of the same process to get the whole business process working.
When I asked the proponents why the IETF a month, or two ago, they were overwhelmingly because it is the easiest place for membership to participate in, because there's not fees, there's not joining requirements, there's not all the other things, and it's an open specification. So it made sense to me.
No, it was not meaning that it was just about the inter-SDOs coordination. So when let's assume we create the working group, is there a liaison statement sent to other SDOs about that?
We could invite them.
Or invite them?
Yeah.
Okay. It's just a question because I am on other SDOs and just mindful about no duplication of work, but as well collaboration.
That's fair. And so one of the questions we'll ask in a minute is the IETF the right place to solve this problem? But I have another question preceding that, but I'll let Alyssa speak first.
Yeah, just related point that usually we have in the charter of the other groups that this group will liaise with, and this charter doesn't have any of that. So
that is
that's
valid,
probably something, especially if you're going to reuse the terminology from ISO.
My bad. The previous version had a whole bunch of institutions. My bad.
Yeah.
Well, no, it's not institutions, it's other standards organizations or things like that.
Or, I mean, other working groups, if it sounds like there's going to be coordination with SCIT or whatever.
To me, the charter editing needs to happen after we get an agreement that there should be a charter. So there's steps. Go ahead.
Yeah, you just said that was the point behind my question. Is I was not seeing any reference to other works, just to be precise.
Yep, we can certainly do that, and also within stuff within the IETF as well. Gilbert.
Just on that point, in the European Commission, we have an annual kind of standards check-in. So we've got IEEE, ITUT, ISO, open source, even commercial entities coming, and they present the work that everyone is doing, especially in this space. And that's a way where we can actually check notes and understand what's progressed in different areas and what we shouldn't reinvent, because if it's already been done in one standards body, why reinvent it? That's coming up by the end of the year. So if there's an opportunity, we can represent IETF in that workshop to showcase what the thinking is in IETF, and then also understand what all the other standards bodies are doing at the same time.
So with my IAB hat on, we run, we are responsible for, the Internet Architecture Board is responsible for reaching out to other standards organizations where there is overlap and we need communication to avoid duplication and things like that in agreement. That is something the IAB is more than willing to take on. If this actually brings in new groups that the IETF needs to associate with, there's absolutely a path to make that happen. So that shouldn't be.
There's formal liaisons that can be established.
Exactly. Yeah. We have a whole process related to that. All right, with that, I am, and chairs, you nod at me if I'm heading in the right direction here, but my thinking is there are two aspects to the discussion today. The first is this a problem that needs to be solved? And that is independent of, is the IETF the right place to solve it? Do we have the resources here to do it? So I'm going to ask the first one first, which is, and I'm going to constrain it to just the data asset transfer. So I think the wording I'm going to use is, I believe, so this is as if you were voting, right? I believe that the problem of data asset transfers is a problem that needs to be solved somewhere. So the goal will be, you will raise your hand if you think it's a problem, that you understand well enough and that it needs to be solved. And you will, click the don't raise your hand if you actually disagree. You don't think it should ever be solved anywhere. If you're not sure, then you don't touch anything. Does that make sense? John? No. Oh, no. So I need to click on the button, but I don't do it before explaining it because then we get into a whole debate of I clicked at the wrong time. So the poll is open. So anybody that has properly logged into the data tracker, and you should be able to click raise or don't raise your hand. For Dennis, make sure we do take down notes once it sort of stops ticking upward. So we'll give it another 30 seconds or so. Okay, I think we'll call that good. So for the note taker, there are 36 raised hands and 2 do not raised hands. If the people that said, functionally this is not a problem that should be solved, if you want to speak, now is the time to join the queue. Krishnasuri, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name right. But, oh, that was a raise hand problem. Okay. Do either of the 2 do not raise hands people want to speak? Okay. So the next question I'm going to ask is this a problem, a digital asset transfer problem? Is the digital asset I actually had these written out ahead of time, but I'm changing the wording, of course, based on the discussion today. So I think the way I'm going to word it is the IETF the right place to create the digital asset transfer protocol? So we've agreed that the problem needs to be solved to be able to transfer a digital asset. Is the IETF the right venue to do that? So you'd raise your hand if you believe it is the right venue and it should be done here with all of our processes for working groups and things like that, versus I actually think it should be done somewhere else. I think there's strong consensus it should be solved. There's a question of, is the IETF the right place, or you'd rather see it go somewhere else? Don't raise your hand if you don't know. And we do recognize our tools are a little weird with the do not raise hand button that confuses the heck out of everybody that's new. I am actively not participating. That's really what that means. I love seeing people change their minds. Okay, so that is pretty stable to where it was last time. So we'll note for the minutes that there are 35 people that raised their hands and 3 that did not. And I'm going to do the same thing as before. For the 3 people that did not raise their hands, meaning you do not think it should be done here, I'd like to hear, and I'd love to hear your opinion. Richard Barnes, it looks like you're first in the queue. Go for it.
Yeah, hey, I did not raise my hand because that was my manifestation of the concerns that we were talking about. I think Ecker talked a while about not having quite the right community here, or the right connections to the community of folks who would ship this. So I'm not yet convinced of that.
Okay, can you before you leave, can you characterize what you think the right community is? When you said you want the right community, what would that manifestation look like?
What I would like to be confident of is that, if we develop something here, it will actually get usage. And so, you know, I think, by analogy to the MLS case, which I think, as Ecker pointed out in the chat, was like kind of the best case for buffer. We had, a lot of operators, in the room saying they wanted this, even though it was a future thing. What I would like to see here is, folks who are actually doing these sort of transfers, moving assets around, saying that, if a tool like this were available and there was a standard, like it would help them do their business better, and they would be actually moving transactions over it.
Got it. So let me read the wording of the next one, and Eric, you can talk first, of course, but
sure.
The wording of the next question that I think I will do is, I am a participant that will actively implement or deploy the results. Is that a fair answer to help you with that question?
Would be helpful, sure.
Okay, so Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, my concerns are, I think, the same ones which were elucidated, but I'll try to sharpen what I would actually like to see.
Yep.
Which is representatives of the networks of the networks that are being gatewayed in the scenario being here, because like there's a distinction between I am the person making the gateway and I'm the people who are operating the networks. And others are the people who are operating the networks up here at this.
Okay, so why don't I split
if
it?
If they are here, fantastic. If they're not here, I'm like less happy.
All right, so would it be satisfactory for me then to split it into two questions? One is, implement. One is implement, and the other being involved in the networks actually that will make use of it. I need to work on the wording of that, but that's sort of the point.
And just to be clear, like I hear Thomas's point, and if what the outcome is that we hear from those people in email later that they will appear and will even appear remotely, that'd be great too. Like I understand they're not here, that's fine. But what I'd like to know, I think that the IESG, when they go to approve this, should ask, is there a critical mass of those people who are willing to hang out and participate in some fashion? That's the question. One question I'm really interested in.
No, I think Eric, your point is 1,000% valid, right? That if you build it, they may still not come. So we need a protocol that can both be built and people are willing to do the work to build the protocol, but we also need people that are actually going to use it to say, this is not something that's just going to be wasted paper. I have an RFC that is only just now, after like 10 years, people are starting to implement. It took a very long time. I'm glad that it's finally being implemented, but it was very depressing to me that it went 10 years without a single implementation. And now it's actually going to be used by major countries, but go ahead.
I'd just like to challenge that question though, because I don't quite understand why you need the network people to be present compared to the gateway people, because asset transfer is an application on top of the network. You don't need those node operators there.
So let me add to that question real quick before you answer, Eric, because it's relevant. The IETF does not attract operators. That is a consistent problem that we continually have.
Yeah, that's basically, like, I always worry when I hear that the people that are the only people that I'm talking to are the vendors of the alleged product that I'm attempting to design. So that's my concern for exactly what West just said.
Yeah, I mean, we have that problem like everywhere in the IETF, unfortunately, and with some exceptions in the ops area, it does have a few implementations. So, all right, so I'm going to start with the first question of, I am a participant that will actively implement or deploy the results. And we'll dive into later, are you a gateway or are you actually part of a network? That'll be second to this other question. So raise your hand if you are actively, planning on implementing or deploying the results. Do not raise hand means I am not going to actively implement or deploy the results. So yeah, I know, but it counts again. I'm actually more interested in the raise hands, right? So I think that the do not raise hands is less valuable in this particular, result, because it's not like you're actively going to prohibit other people from doing so, right? Roman, do you have a clarifying point?
I'm going to let the poll finish.
Okay. So as I said, the raw numbers of actively raising hands seem more interesting, and that it'll be the number of people that are planning on implementing or deploying. The other people might be security experts here that have no ties to ever actually using the protocol. That doesn't mean they won't help develop it, because it was clear that they were. All right, I think we'll call that good. So there are 11. 11, 12, darn it, 12 people that have indicated they will, actively implement or deploy the results. And then there are 19 that are bystanders and participants of observation and protocol developers. So.
If possible, it would be super to unpack the 12 there with, I believe, Tomas's second or third slide that used the I and D annotation, because I think there were less than 12 on that list. So that means more people are saying they're going to implement and deploy.
Interesting. Okay.
I mean, just practically, I'm just trying to understand who are those people. If they want to, I mean, you are the chair, but if they want to come to mic, that'd be super if they would tell us or drop it in kind of Jabber, or is this double counting? We have multiple representatives, which is great.
Right. I mean, we're doing an open source, simple one at MIT, just client server, not just the middle bit.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm already there.
Right. So Roman, I did not say only one organization. One person for an organization may representatively vote. But Venkat Raman, you're first.
To respond to both what Roman was saying, I think that maybe Eric and others were talking about earlier. A lot of people who who are running networks, they try to, instead of going towards a standard body right away, they try to seek out projects that are working on interoperability. So I can give you an example. Last year, we solved an interoperability or set of interoperability scenarios for the Bank of France and HSBC, who are trying to implement several asset exchange and asset transfer use cases across their different networks. And these networks are built on different kinds of technologies like Hyperledger Fabric and Corda. And so they talked about their experience and the experimental success in the recent Hyperledger Global Forum, if anybody is interested. There are recordings available online. So what I'm trying to say is that people first try to, the stakeholders, the people who are running networks, first try to seek out solutions, experiment with them, and then the kind of people who are providing solutions, like we are doing, we are maintaining the flagship interoperability project under Hyperledger called Hyperledger Cacti. We are the ones who are participating in the standards activities so that we can take these lessons and make sure that the solutions we're providing to those companies are complying with the standards.
Thank you. John?
Yeah, I'm John Roboth. I'm the CTO of a team in EY that builds, distributed data sharing solutions and blockchain solutions. That's why I've been participating in this. You'll see in the slide above, early on, that we were registered as an observer. That's because EY is this enormous organization, and getting the approval to say that EY is more than an observer would probably take me the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, that's always a problem too. So one last interest question before we need to sort of begin wrapping up, and I want to give the ADs a chance to give final things. But based on Eric's suggestion of wanting to know, are there actual operators of asset networks that will use the protocol? That is the next question. So it is, I am an operator of an asset network that will use the SAT protocol. So raise your hand if you are an operator of a network. And as I said, we recognize that we don't attract many operators. Please be honest here in terms of, you really must be running one of these networks. We're going to ignore the do not raise hands count because it's not relevant. So. We've had 1 or 2, but that's a good point. All right, so I think we'll call that good. There looks like there are 4 people that have indicated they actually run networks. We've heard from a 1 or 2 at least, including some that can't actually say it yet. If any of those 4 were willing to come to the mic and just explain your particular network, if you're able to, we recognize there's legal obligations of speaking for your company that may not be handled yet. 5. So we'll count at 5 total for the vote. 4. No, we're back to 4. Luke? Okay. So nobody has raised their hands, unfortunately. So I think one of the things that we should ask Thomas and his crew to do is potentially see if we can actually get real operators to provide a list of people that actually say that they will deploy it. If it's, as I said, we don't attract operators. With that, I think that the only other questions that I needed to ask were the typical review and edit type questions. Is that sufficient for you guys? Anything else? Okay, so let's do, I am willing to help review documents. Review, read, participate in the list, be an active participant. But reviewing documents is the key part, which is why we don't say just show up at the meetings. We need you to actually read the documents and critique. So in interest of time, I'm going to cut this off pretty quickly. All right, let's call that good at 28, just in the interest of time. I will help edit and author documents. So this is for editors and authors. We should not have 28, okay? We don't need 28 authors. That is not going to happen, so we need a few. But if you're willing to actually do the active role of editing and authoring a document and taking contributions and text from people and massaging it into the text, and I know we have some people doing that already, so. And there's a bunch of people that say that they will actively oppose editing. I think we'll call that good. That's 12, which seems actually like too many anyway, so we'll call that good. At this point, ADs, we did not get to editing the charter. That does not surprise me. We did get a couple of good comments that we will take back, and the proponents can add things like interoperability liaisonships to other organizations, as well as a security, I'm blanking on the right wording, but looking at this, producing a document that talks about the threat model. So I think that will be added to the goals. The charter is fairly long, so I didn't think we'd get to it today, but it would be helpful. It is online, it's on GitHub. One of the slides actually has a reference to it. So please do review it, and I will let the ADs have their secret conference, and then they can speak. One of you has to talk. I don't care which. You can even use this microphone if you want.
Okay. So clearly there's a lot to digest here. I think we will take it back and we will do some long discussions. It doesn't seem to be like an obvious solution one way or the other. It doesn't seem to be a very obvious outcome. It's an interesting, complicated problem that we will need to think about deeply.
One of the things that the leadership was talking about the other day is that it's not obvious at the end of a BOF what the outcome is. And I need to apologize for the leadership that we don't do that well. We take it back, we think about it, and it's not at the end of at a BOF, everybody knows the working group's going to happen or it's been rejected. There's discussions that happen afterwards, and that's definitely, I think, what was happening here as well. So don't take this as a negative sign or a positive sign for that matter, because the discussions happen later in the week and in leadership discussions at the AESG in the next couple of weeks. Unfortunately, what that means for usually people in the room is they leave a little confused, and that's just how the process works. But there will be a answer, and it will be posted to the SAT mailing list once the ADs have determined where to go from here.
Sure. And if we're talking process, it's also worth kind of recognizing that this is just part of the IETF community and BOF is an input to the process, but we also use the robust mailing list that we're trying to kind of build to help us reason through that. And we would check any consensus we would find there as well.
Yep. I think I won't ask for any additional questions because we are exactly at time. So I ran it perfectly to the line, and that is always the goal. Thank you all for participating. I actually found it a fascinating discussion. I see where there's work that needs to be done and where it's actually somewhat decided. So I think there was decent progress here one way or another. Thank you all for coming.
Yeah, and also just want to thank everybody for putting in this a lot of time and coming here and efforts, and also especially Wes for doing a really good job of being a very objective, outside of the process person doing the process guiding without any stake in the game. It's really appreciated.
You're right by the mic. Just
No, you can.
Oh, you can. Yeah, we know.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.